Hello, my name is MegaMadVlad, and today I'm going to be speaking in defense of Fallout 4. Now, a lot of people have actually taken a look at Fallout 4 in particular and looked at it in a way where it is a bad game. While it's got its glitches and everything, I want to speak in defense to it. People say it's a bad game, it's a bad Fallout game, so on and so forth. It's got different ideas here and there that are kind of sporadic in some ways, like the camp building and everything, being something new to the franchise of Fallout. But as it turns out, what I want to talk about here is I want to list off a list of points here and tell you why Fallout 4, while it may not be the greatest Fallout game out there, I want to say it is still a great game. Now, Fallout 4 may be a departure from the typical Fallout kind of formula of being very RPG focused, single player choice driven RPG. But continuing with that right there, while it is a departure from that, it still does have RPG elements to it. It still has a very sound story going from point A to point B. It gives you a goal, and pretty much any RPG is going to give you a goal at one point or the other. Not every game is going to end up being like Skyrim, for instance. Skyrim, yes, it has a goal, but it's kind of seen on the back burner. This one is kind of the same. Fallout 4, you have a goal, which is your, finding your son Sean. He was taken from you, and you need to find him. Now, that goal can be technically put on the back burner, but it's still a goal. It has a story from start to finish. You have a clear vision of what you need to achieve for this main story right here. And it's not going to hold your hand and tell you need to do this. You have other quests that are always going to be available to you. This is still an RPG in every sense of the word, where you can you can start the game and realize you need to go find your son Sean, and then say screw it to that one, and then go off and do some other things. It's not like it's an on-rails story-driven game. This right here is still going to be it's still a story where you can choose what you want to do when you want to do it. If you want to go exploring, go explore. If you don't want to, don't bother with it. Now, the world of Fallout 4 is the Boston area and kind of like its surroundings. A lot of people have stated that the world itself is kind of bland and kind of flat. Well, I can definitely understand the flat aspect. When you're taking that into consideration right there, you also need to take into consideration what they did with the world itself. Yes, it may be mostly flat. There's still some hills here and there, but it's not like it's going to be mountainous regions or anything of the sort like that. You still have like a full city, the full city of Boston in there. You have some areas that are going to be completely wide open. You have the glowing sea. Even if it's mostly flat land, these areas are not lacking in creativity here. Continuing with that right there, the world itself is still supposed to be a Fallout location. It's supposed to be made in a way where everything is devastated, and you're exploring it. You're seeing what's still there, what is new to that area, so on and so forth. Diamond City is a great example. It used to be a baseball park, and you're going into it, and it's now a city. It's now a protected city because it has big enough walls for it. It can help protect against, various raider attacks or anything for the most part. And they have a full city. They have, they have a lot going on for it. Obviously, Diamond City is kind of saying city is kind of redundant there because it's literally a baseball field, but you get the idea here. The locations in the game itself are perfectly fine. It may be flat land, but it's still very creative. Like, you go into the glowing sea, it is probably one of the most Fallout locations you can be in pretty much any of the newer age Fallout games. That's considering 3 in New Vegas as well. The glowing sea is like the epitome of Fallout. You need to go in there with protection because it's completely irradiated filled. All right, so that's one point right there. Another point would be the factions. In Fallout 3, Bethesda had it where they kind of wanted to take a departure from factions they still had factions exist, but it was in a way where you couldn't join them per se. They kind of worked around that at the end with Brotherhood of Steel, where you were kind of like working with them instead of working under them, like joining the faction. But they still had factions in the game, but it was kind of written in a different way. This game, Fallout 4, has factions themselves. You can join them and everything. They have different storylines. They have different things you can do. And Fallout 4 was done in a way where they kind of have, I forget what it's called, but it's where they have random quests pop up all the time. And it's, well, it's supposed to help keep you going, make it seem like the world is more fleshed out and real and everything. I'm just gonna say right now, Preston is a great example of this entire system right here, where he would actually every now and then pop up, say you need to help out with this or whatever. Once you helped out with whatever settlement that needed help right there, what would end up continuing from there is then, like, the whole idea is you're supposed to have the castle by that point. You have the castle, then you have the radio. You listen to the radio, and the radio right there is going to tell you what settlements are under attack, and it's supposed to keep that whole thing going on right there. You build up the settlement, it gets attacked. In a real life scenario here, it would get attacked because if it's built up in any way, shape, or form, any sort of normal person would think, oh, they have stuff that I can take. And in a Fallout setting, what are they going to do? This kind of works in a good way to make it seem real. However, one thing that did work against it and actually became a meme in the internet right here for Fallout 4 was the whole concept that this happens so often, so very often. But that's also why that's just one faction right there. That right there is just the Minutemen. You also have the Institute. You also have the Brotherhood of Steel. You also have the Railroad. Those are the four main factions right there. They're all vying for power in some way or the other. They all have different goals, and you are the one person that can help them to achieve those goals. They have, you know, very specific missions that are catered towards those goals as well, but then they still have those random quests that are going to pop up, either when you hit a certain point or throughout while you're working on that quest line. And it's not just that, but they also have faction leaders. The Minutemen, you can say, is kind of unique in a sense. Unique and not unique at the same time. The Minutemen have it to where you yourself are the supposed leader. You're the general of the Minutemen. But when you're there, like, the whole concept of you leading them is great and all, but it's also done in a way where you're still taking orders from people down below you. While you do tell them what to do in some aspects, and like when you have settlements and everything like that, you can build up the settlements. You're technically taking control of the people in those settlements. They are all technically Minutemen in that sense right there. Well, technically they're settlement people, but for the most part, you tell which people are set to defense, what people are set to farm, so on and so forth. You are the Minutemen. You're there to help the lower people. Not lower people. You're there to help the people in need, is what it is. You're still giving them orders. You are still technically a general in the source right there. Now, that's the Minutemen. And when it comes to the Brotherhood of Steel, you're never going to be the top dog. The top dog is Elder Maxon. I think the highest you can get up to is, what was it? Vanguard? Sentinel. The highest you can get up to was Sentinel. That is the highest rank you can get in any of these games, to my knowledge anyway. I don't think you can do that in Fallout 1 or 2. Fallout 1 was barely a thing, but once you hit Sentinel, that's the end of that storyline right there for, you know, the overarching storyline for the Brotherhood of Steel, their individual thing before it comes into play with other factions. Now, with that right there, what ends up happening is you end up as a Sentinel getting a quest after that, and it leads into those various other subsequent quests that are going to continue on. That's how that one works right there, and they do all have stories. Same thing with Institute. Institute has a story. I'm not going to explain this for anybody who doesn't really for anybody who hasn't technically played Fallout 4 and doesn't know the story and everything. I'm not going to spoil anything here, just so you're aware. I'm just saying the fact that the Institute is a faction in there. which some people could consider as a spoiler, but not really at the same time. Now, when it comes to the fourth one, the Railroad, they are another one, another faction, same concept. Now, next point is onto gameplay. Now, the gameplay to this game is leagues better than what was in Fallout 3 and Fallout New Vegas. Fallout New Vegas may have been a step up from Fallout 3, but you could also definitely see the age in those games when they were made, what kind of engine they were using at the time, so on and so forth. Fallout 4 is done in a way where they actually, I did hear this, I never actually confirmed this, but one thing I did hear was that they actually got some devs from Bungie, from basically the epitome of some of the best designers behind a first-person shooter, like Halo and Destiny. They got those few of them into working on to the the shooting mechanics of Fallout 4. They raised the whole gameplay aspect up considerably from that, and this is coming right off of Fallout 3 and New Vegas, where the shooting mechanics were very stiff. They were extremely stiff, but thankfully with keyboard and mouse they're a lot more tolerable. But as it comes to Fallout 4, you turn and you're able to aim accordingly, and things are a lot more natural and fluent in everything. And then you also have the AI, which, you have some suiciders, you have people that actually hide behind cover. The game can be challenging, like no joke, it can actually be a challenge to it. You have various different types of enemies. You have all of them that have various different types of stats. You have some boss monsters you can kind of consider. You have some like a couple boss fights. They don't have like a boss bar pop up, but it's supposed to be a fight because, boss fight. And then you have like absolutely insane monsters that come out with like a lot of different defenses and everything, and can murder you, like death claws and stuff like that. So the game does have its challenge. It does have a fluent enough system where with the shooting mechanics, and you can also throw grenades. Like in Fallout 3 and New Vegas, what ended up happening with grenades was you would have to replace your weapon in hand with a grenade. While that made sense at the time, it sort of made sense at the time, Call of Duty was doing it in a way where it was like more natural, where you could hold your weapon and just throw a grenade. Same thing with Halo, but for Fallout 4, they also did the same thing. You just have to hold the button for a sec. Once you hear the click, you're technically cocked the grenade. You throw the grenade once you release the button, and your gun is still out the entire time. It's not like you have to put it away to replace it with a grenade or anything like that. So it's much more intuitive this time. It's definitely a leap forward from what 3 and New Vegas were. You also have DLC for this game, just like the previous ones. However, you really have about 2 major DLCs, and then you have a third smaller one, and then a lot of smaller ones after that. But the 2 major ones are the ones I'm going to talk about here. What you have here is, for the first one, you go to an island. Now, the first DLC, which is called Far Harbor, it actually got a lot of praise behind it, where even though it does still have a step back in terms of its RPG elements, what it took a step forward in was the factions and how they integrated with each other. Now, I'm not going to say what the factions are, but I can say right now that there are 3 of them, and you decide which one or ones get to live on the island. And the story is written in a way where they make you question a few things while also kind of expanding upon the lore of the game at the same time. You're in an island for this location, so of course that means it's secluded and everything, but they give you reasons for everything here, and the story is very interesting, the characters as well. Now, one point that I see some people saying bad things about it on the internet every now and then, but for the most part, a lot of times you'll see a lot of praise that Bethesda gets for this. And people may, people may like bag on the story of the game and everything, but something that a lot of people do not bag on is actually the characters, like your companions and everything. The companions in Fallout 4 are so much better than what would be in 3, for instance. In Fallout 3, you had a lot of like one-note characters, ones that would show up, tell you something randomly, do something random, and then you can never interact with them again. They may be an interesting character outright, but they don't have any sort of continuation. They don't have anything outside of what you just saw right there. Now, in Fallout 4, the companions in particular have a lot more depth to them. They all have their own quest lines that you can work with. They all have their own likes and dislikes. They can leave you at any time if you're doing a lot of things that they don't like. Your relationship with them differs depending on what you do. And you like they also help you out, obviously, in a firefight, for instance, but that's what a companion does. But one thing with them is they're always written in various different ways. Like Nick Valentine, he is literally a Brooklyn cop from like way back when, but he's not a Brooklyn cop at the same time. He's a synth, which is one of the main enemies in this game. Synthetics, where they're artificial humans of sorts. You kind of like think of like an android concept right there. And he was given false memories being that of a Brooklyn cop from New York, Brooklyn. And he has the accent, he has a storyline that follows what that Brooklyn cop's goal was, and everything still makes sense in this world right here with how he was written. I don't know what else to say about this. This is just one example right here. Like Nick Valentine was listed as one of the best companions that Fallout has had. He's very endearing in terms of like making people want to help him out and everything, also keeping him around in general. And when it comes to certain like events happening in the game, a lot of the times the companions themselves will add on to the cutscene itself as to what's going on. Like for the Brotherhood of Steel, when they come into the game itself, into Fallout 4, it's I want to say about like a halfway point in the story, ish, somewhere around there. And they're flying in on their giant ship, and that's technically a cutscene, and that right there is a cutscene that's in motion at the same time. It's not like one of those ones where they take you out of the experience to show a full cutscene. This is happening in real time. That's something that Bethesda likes to do, and they take full advantage of it in Fallout 4. My final point here is about the lore of the game. There are a few things that Bethesda has technically gone back on, where they've retconned previous lore stuff, but for the most part, they like to keep a lot of things being similar enough, understandably enough, to where it makes sense in the case of what they established already on the East Coast with Fallout 3. In New Vegas 1 and 2, they're all on the West Coast area. So they wanted to keep that, stationed over there and keep that going as it was, while Bethesda themselves was working on the East Coast. They wanted to have their own lore because nothing was really tapped on over here for the most part during that time. Fallout 4 is technically a continuation of Fallout 3, just in a different location. It's close enough to where Fallout 3 was located in the DC region, because we're just in Boston, Massachusetts. It's technically just a few states away. Things make sense because you had the Brotherhood of Steel on the East Coast. They were there in Fallout 3, and then now they're coming in Fallout 4 into the location that you're at right there. Things still make sense in this way, in this regard right here. And as you go through the game, you're also going to like hit loading screens, because this game did come out in 2015, I think it was. The loading screens themselves actually tell you some lore tidbits here and there. Now, the lore itself is one of the big things that actually got me into the Fallout franchise in general. And Fallout 4, while it does have some retcons here and there, they still like to keep true to what they had going starting with Fallout 3. And that's something I really respect. I like it. If you tell something to someone and then you take that information and then kind of skew it a little bit, that's technically a retcon right there. And while nobody feels good about retcons because it changes what was original established lore in some way, shape, or form, like I'm gonna use Dragon Ball as an example here. Dragon Ball Z, Dragon Ball Super. Dragon Ball Z had it to where there was these earrings called the Patara earrings. They fused two beings and it was supposed to be permanent. Dragon Ball Super, which came out decades later, but took that concept right there and said those two beings, if they are not Kais, which is gods in that universe, they are only going to be fused up to an hour. So while it's the characters in question, which were Goku and Vegeta who fused, they did split in Dragon Ball Z. However, back then it was established that it was because of what was going on at the time. Something was interfering with the fusion itself, making it unstable. Now, this retcon, while it doesn't take that whole idea away, it gives us a new kind of thing going right there as to like another reason of sorts. It's changing the way it was seen before and giving us a new look at it, some new information. It's like continuing off of the same point. Fallout 4, it does its retcons in a similar way, except for like maybe one or two of them. And I will say one of the lore tidbits was definitely very off-putting, being that of the Nuka-Cola power armor, making literally no sense. The rest of it, I think is actually fairly decent. And that right there is my kind of short defense of Fallout 4. It's a game that, while I agree is not the greatest kind of Fallout game in the world, taking a few steps back in terms of the RPG aspect and kind of like taking some steps forward in more cinematic approach and gameplay. What they did though is they still made a great game. I love the camp system. I love the gameplay itself. It is by far the strongest in terms of gameplay out of all of them. While it's, you know, like I said, less in RPG aspects, you still do have a solid enough story, and it's still technically an RPG where you decide what you want to do when you want to do it, and going from there. You do still have decisions you can make, so it's not like you're dropped in here and it's an on-rails thing where you have no choices whatsoever. It's still an RPG, and it's still set in the Fallout universe. It's still solid enough to work. So we don't know what the future is going to hold right now. We have Fallout 76 obviously, but that is a very far departure, and very questionable if that's going to be seen as canon in general or not, because they're changing Fallout 76, they're retconning quite a few things, but Fallout 4 is the main point of this right here, and I still think it's an absolutely great game. It is one of my favorites out there. So thank you all so much for watching. I appreciate you all. I hope to see y'all next time. Adios.